Fucking hell. Fuck that. Let's do this. Good morning, everybody. I said good morning, everybody. Oh, I love it. I love it. So, who needs to know who I am? Do most of you, have you seen me before somewhere? Has anyone never been to a Creative Mornings I've hosted? Oh my God. Well, just wait. It's going to be fun. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Keith Frankel. Until recently, I was the host of Creative Mornings Boston for the last 4 long goddamn years. But it was a blast every step of the way. In this talk, I'll share some of the rest of my background, so I won't get into it now. So I'm here to talk about commitment. And yeah, I get the irony that less than a month after quitting Creative Mornings, I'm here to talk about commitment. I feel like that was a little passive-aggressive jab, but we're here. So, a few thoughts here. So when I was first thinking about talking on this topic, I was like, fuck, I have no idea what I'm going to talk about here. And the more and more I thought about it, I said, well, I could talk about that project I did a few years ago where I committed a year to not lying to anybody about anything. And I blogged about the experience. And I was like, well, that'll be interesting. Everyone can sort of relate to that. Everybody's a big fucking liar in their personal and professional lives. So I'll talk about that. But the more and more I thought about this, the more I felt like if you're interested, you can Google that. And to me, the best Creative Mornings talks are the ones that are highly personal and highly story-driven. They're not the ones that necessarily just talk about a specific piece of work or a body of work. And so last night at midnight, I completely scrapped the talk I was going to talk about and made this until about 2:30 in the morning. And so this is what we're going to talk about. So about today's trajectory, when I was sort of thinking about this theme of commitment and how it related to my life, the more and more I thought about it, I have an atypical relationship with this term, with this idea of commitment, right? So conventional wisdom says that to really be successful at something, you have to put everything into it, right? You have to basically commit yourself wholeheartedly to the endeavor that you really want to be successful at. And that just has not been the case for my career, right? The things that have made me good, what I think good at the work I do, has nothing to do with committing everything to one thing. My man. It's been really committing to not committing. These are the things that have made me really good, I think, at what I do. It's not been the 10,000 hours focused on one activity, right? It's been a lot of activities that together really influence what I think I have unique to provide to my work, the people around me, my communities, whatever it is. So today I wanted to talk about this, but because this is a terrible fucking title, instead we're going to talk about why whole-ass one thing when you can half-ass a lot. All right, so let's get into it. So because I like them personal, because over the last 4 years I've been asked hundreds of times, like, what do you do outside of this? I figured I would share some of my own personal story. I hope that's okay with you guys. If it's not, oh well, you're here, so we're going to get going. Okay, so I'm originally from a small town in Athens, Alabama. So I grew up in a farm town. My family owned a cattle farm. My town was the largest cotton-producing county in Alabama. I would spend weekends shooting guns with moonshiners. I got a pistol permit for $15. I never took a test. My driver's license had race, and mine was W for white, right? Not Caucasian. This is the town I grew up in. So basically, if you're familiar with Varsity Blues, that was me. So although I was raised in Alabama for the majority of my life, I was first-generation Southern. So my mom was from a small town in New Mexico called Carlsbad, mostly Mexican population, and my dad was from Bronx, New York, a mostly non-white neighborhood. And so the reason I bring that up is because the mentality of the place in which I was first socialized, my home, was very, very different from the mentality of the community right outside my front door. And so because of that, I never felt like I was at home. Alabama, Athens never felt like a good fit for me. I was certainly, I would say, a welcome guest in a lot of communities and social groups and friend groups, but I never felt like a true member of any of those. So why that matters is essentially as soon as I could leave Alabama and get the fuck out of there, I did. So I graduated high school and I started looking at schools that I wanted to go to, and I was looking in the Northeast, and I decided to go to Yale. So the reason I chose Yale was really simple, two reasons. One, it was the hardest school to get into at the time. That was enough. I just wanted to get into the hardest school. Most importantly, two, it looked like Hogwarts. So I was like, that's fucking awesome. Let's go to Hogwarts. And because I was the son of a doctor, and like every child of a doctor, from the time you're 5, you've also heard you were going to be a doctor, I went and I was pre-med. So I was pre-med at Yale, living life, taking biology classes and chemistry classes. And then I realized that this actually was not Hogwarts, and there was nothing magical about this. Yale is in a little town called New Haven, and New Haven is a cesspool of terribleness. Who here is from New Haven? My man Chris. But you're here now. Oh, no. Best thing about it is Pepe's Pizza. Other than that, all right. So I quickly realized, oh man, screw this. I got to get the hell out of Dodge. And so I transferred to Tufts, which is how I ultimately made it to Boston. So when I transferred to Tufts, I was still pre-med. I was doing bio classes and chemistry classes. But when I was setting up the rest of my schedule, I wanted to avoid having Friday morning classes. Come on, mimosas, right? And so I was looking through what classes I could take that would keep me from having Friday morning classes. And there was only one that I could take, and it was called Knowing and Being. And it was an intro to philosophy course. I said, yeah, sure, I can do that. I'll take this, and that'll keep me from Friday morning classes. So in philosophy, or Knowing and Being, we were studying things like, what makes a chair a chair? Is the color red real? Why is death bad? Some real existential, hard-hitting questions, right? At the same time, in my chemistry classes, we were studying things like this, and this, and this. So I said, fuck that. I dropped out of biology and chemistry. I called my dad at midnight during my first midterm, and I said, Dad, the worst thing that has happened has happened. He goes, oh my God, you have AIDS. I was like, whoa. Fucking hell, no. No, I don't think so. He goes, oh my God, you got somebody pregnant. I was like, no, like what is, I was like, all right, what happened? I said, well, I've decided to cease pursuing medicine, and instead I'm going to become a professional philosopher. And there was this long silence, and he said, okay, well, enjoy lifelong unemployment. And this is how I spent the next few years, completely consumed in this philosophy work. So I was reading and I was writing. In some cases, I was publishing my own academic philosophy papers. And this is what I thought I was going to do professionally, right? Now, I'm going to share a little bit about philosophy. It's going to get dense for a second, but I promise there's a reason I'm doing it. So just hold with me. Deal? Yeah. Okay. So the first day of almost every introductory philosophy course, a professor should teach you 2 core things about philosophy. The first is that the basic unit of philosophy is argument, just like the basic unit of math is numbers, right? The basic unit of philosophy is argument. All ideas, all knowledge has to be defended and justified through argumentation, okay? The second thing is that all arguments are ultimately made up of 2 fundamental units, premises and a conclusion. Every argument that's ever been had, every argument you've ever had with your boo can be broken down into premises that ultimately lead to a conclusion, right? Now, the validity or soundness of an argument ultimately depends on a very specific set of criteria, whether the argument is true or not. And those criteria are basically this. All premises must be valid, and the conclusion must logically follow from those premises. Meaning every one of the points of your argument have to be true, and the conclusion, if all of those are true, it has to follow that the conclusion is true, right? So that's a little dense, but let me give 2 examples. All right, first example. This is a case in which the premises are true, they're valid, but the argument is not sound because the conclusion's wrong. All Republican senators are citizens. All Democratic senators are citizens. This is true. You have to be a U.S. citizen to be a senator. However, the conclusion, all Republican senators are Democratic senators, is not true. Everybody get it? All right. Now, here's the typical valid and sound argument. All men are mortal. Keith is a man. What's up? Therefore, Keith is mortal. So this is a valid and sound argument. Everybody got it? Now, every argument that's ever been made in the history of mankind or will ever be made between you and your family over Thanksgiving can ultimately be broken down into a series of premises and a conclusion that, if succinct enough into a bulleted list, should be able to fit on a single piece of paper. This is true. So the question is, why is every piece of philosophy 400 fucking pages long? Okay, and the reason is really simple, because not only do you have to present these premises and the conclusion, but essentially every premise in an argument is a conclusion in and of itself. So you have to defend that premise, every single one. And in philosophy, the difference of an and or an or can fundamentally break the entire argument. So if you've written 350 pages of an argument, and in your second to last premise, you make a mistake, there's no reason reading the rest of it. It's over. And this is why people have such little patience for philosophy in a modern world. It's really difficult to do. It's really, really trying, right? But if you stick with it, philosophy teaches your brain some really interesting things. It trains your brain to be able to handle the details, to really obsess about the minutia without getting bogged down by them, right? And if you can keep that in mind, all of these details, but always keep in touch where you're ultimately trying to go, the conclusion, then you can be a really good philosopher. But it's really hard to do. But if you stick with it, you can get really good at this, of being able to obsess about the micro details, but never lose sight of where you're ultimately trying to go. Okay, let's all take a deep breath. We're done with philosophy. Moving on. Okay, so back to Tufts. I transferred to Tufts. I decide not to do pre-med. I'm studying philosophy. And when I transferred to Tufts, I'm put in an on-campus apartment with 5 other guys, most of them black guys. And every night they'd come home and they were doing this thing called stepping in our apartment. Who here is familiar with stepping or strolling? Which white people are familiar with it? There we go, I like it. Stomp the yard. Okay, so for those of you who are unfamiliar with stepping, stepping is essentially a performance art in which the performers not only are responsible for choreographing the physical moves, but also making the music that they're dancing to using their bodies. So if you've seen the Broadway show Stomp, it's very similar to that, but without props. Cool? I can keep talking about it, or I can show you. Let's try this again. So under a whole lot of pressure of these guys I just happened to move into when I transferred to Tufts, they eventually convinced me, to come down and do this tryout. I was like, dude, I'm never fucking doing this. Like, you look at me, this is translucent skin. I'm not going to do this. So they eventually convinced me, and I went down and I tried out for it. And I made the team, and I was the only white guy to make the team. So for a while, I was the only white guy on this team. And then in 6 months, I was the captain of this all-male, all-black -1 essentially professional step team. And so people would ask me, like, how did you get into this? Did you do this growing up because it's big in the South? And the truth is, for all those you don't know, stepping is really big in the African-American Greek community, especially in the South. So I said, no, I never saw it growing up, but it spoke to me, right? In stepping, this looks crazy and big and boisterous, but there's an incredible amount of subtle nuance going into this that makes this as good as it is, right? So for example, clapping like this versus clapping like this have two very different sounds. This is louder, this is cleaner. You have to make a decision. Clapping like this immediately breaks the wrist. The wrist can't stay tight like this without flexing the arms, which makes the whole upper body tight, right? When you're pointing a certain direction, your offhand needs to be 90 degrees. It can't slump because that looks sloppy. But your hand can't cross your sternum, okay? Because then the only way to keep your elbow up is to cock your shoulder, right? If you're doing something like dusting your feet off, right? This hand is tucked and clean. It's not hanging out here, right? Now, as an audience, none of you saw that. You had no fucking idea. But as a stepper, we obsess about those things. And that's why I was good at this. And the value of that is the overall performance for the audience is significantly better and cleaner. But you don't notice the subtle details. But as a stepper, you have to obsess about those. And it's those small things, that nuance, that makes the show so good. It's not being loud and filling a room full of testosterone and taking your shirts off and screaming. That's not it. It's being able to obsess over the details and refine them, but not lose sight of the greater theatrical performance. Got it? I was good at this because of philosophy, not because I got groove. Right? So, all right, so I'm at Tufts. I'm practicing philosophy. We are touring around the country stepping. We're asked to be on America's Best Dance Crew. America's Got Talent. We turn both of those down. We spend a summer touring and teaching in California, making money doing this. It was incredible. And then I get this offer out of the blue to come try out to be a coach on an episode of a reality TV series called Made for MTV. Anyone familiar with Made? Wow, okay. It's because you're older, right? So for those of you who don't know, Made was a 22-season reality TV show on MTV that basically took a sort of down-and-out high school kid, the sort of kid that often found themselves sitting alone at lunch. And these kids would believe that if they could just achieve one goal, it would change how they feel about their high school years. So for example, if I could just make the basketball team, if I could just be prom queen. And we would send in Michael Jordan to go teach the kid to play basketball for 6 weeks. And at the end of the episode, they would try out or play in their first game, so on and so forth. So I got asked out of the blue to basically come interview and try out to be a coach on an episode of Made for a young girl who wanted to learn to step. Some young white girl in the middle of Connecticut. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. And for some reason, I was selected, right? In hindsight, they should have chosen someone else. But I was selected to go do this. And so all of a sudden, I'm in the middle of Connecticut filming a television show as a coach for an art form that I have no cultural connection to, but I got it through just random happen chance, right? I moved into a dorm room with a bunch of guys who did it, decided to go down, was suddenly good at it because of some other skill set that I had been working on that was totally unrelated, right? And so while we're out there shooting, these shoots typically take about 6 weeks. And everyone at MTV is young, right? They're in their lower 30s at the oldest. And so you're there and you're hanging out, you're shooting all day, you're drinking together. I'm making sloppy joes for people back at the hotel. And near the end of shooting, I start saying, hey, you should get me a job, sort of jokingly. In a small town in Alabama, the coolest thing is MTV. That's what your enjoyment was, right? And so I was like, you should get me a job. They're like, yeah, okay, stepper, right? Then 2 weeks later, I get an email, and they say, we have a job opening. Would you like to come interview it? It's casting for this show that we're working on. I said, sure, I'm down to do that. So on Thursday, I take the Amtrak from Boston to New York. On Friday morning, I interview at MTV. Friday afternoon, I have the job. By Monday morning, I've quit philosophy. I've moved all my belongings to New York, and I'm now casting and producing reality television shows at MTV. So they first put me on casting on a really righteous, morally defensible show called 16 and Pregnant, and I was fucking terrible at it. I could not cast for the life of me. I didn't have it in me to just randomly call people up and beg them to do them, knowing that we weren't going to pay them shit to come on this show, and that I could not do this. And so I complained about it to the people there, and eventually they said, okay, we'll transfer you to something else. So they transferred me to the show Made, which I had been on an episode of, and now I was working on. So I started off the first season casting. I eventually was promoted into production. So I was actually making episodes. I was coming up with the story and finding the characters and building these episodes. Now, when I got to MTV, I was the only one that did not go to film school. The only one. No one, everybody else who I worked with had gone to film school, had professional edit certifications for Final Cut Pro 7. I don't even think, what is it now, X? Yeah, all right, older. All right, Final Cut Pro 7, right? Like, didn't know anything about a three-point light kit. I knew nothing, and all of my peers did. But I was better than them at this. And I couldn't understand why. And I was getting promoted much faster. To be a producer takes about 3 years. Within a year and a half, I was producing full episodes and was working on developing new shows. And so the question was, why am I good at this? And I realized it's because of the same skills I learned from philosophy. You see, television, or video in particular, is such a fluid medium. There are between 24 and 30 frames per second, meaning individual images for every second of video. So the old cartoons, those were hand-drawn, every single individual images. It moves too quickly for your brain to obsess about the details, right? So all it sees is this overarching narrative, this story. However, what you're ultimately trying to do is piece these individual micro pieces, these scenes, in such a way that leads you ultimately to the climax of the video, the conclusion. It was the exact same skill set I had developed at studying philosophy. The same thing that allowed me to be pretty good at stepping. So what I noticed is that, listen, I was not the best editor. I didn't know any of the tool set, right? I did not know anything about cameras. I still don't. Can't tell you anything about this mic. But I was able to produce 3 Emmy Award-winning seasons of the show Made, right? All because of a base skill set that I received doing something else entirely, completely unrelated. And of course, over time, I went and learned the execution skills I needed to be able to do this at a higher level. But ultimately, it was not those skills that allowed me to be successful. It was a different skill set achieved doing something else entirely. Well, after 3 years of feeling totally morally bankrupt, I decided that I needed to get the hell out of there and do something else. And tech really amazed me, and this is a talk in and of itself, but I was eventually able to transition out of television production and move into technology. And for the last, I don't know, maybe 8 years, 10 years or so, I've been leading product design teams at various technology companies. So the first was Transparent Language, which built language learning software for the U.S. Department of Defense, Special Operations Command, these sort of government defense agencies who had uniformed personnel who needed to go overseas and carry out critical missions. I was eventually poached by HubSpot to be their creative director. I grew and led a team there up until their IPO. And then I was hired by a company called Firecracker to be Chief Product Officer, and I was there leading their product until it was acquired last year. Now I founded my own company called Parlay. Okay, so, no, didn't go to art school. Couldn't tell you the first thing about Photoshop. Don't know anything about Creative Cloud. I don't post great shots to Dribble, right? Don't have a Behance profile. Don't use Sketch. I use Balsamic, okay? Shout out to the balsamic people in the room. We're judged. We're a dying breed. All right? I didn't spend 5 to 10 years at an agency trying to work my way up to art director, right? But I was still able to do these jobs, and I was able to be successful at these jobs. Why? Because product design, UX design, is so similar to all the different skills I had done before that, all coming from philosophy, right? Product design, web design, is essentially taking a series of pixels, of images, of copy, forming it in a way that naturally leads you to the actionable behavior you want a user to take, to the call to action, if it's to fill out a form, to get them to watch a video, to request a demo, to do whatever in the product they want to do in order to be successful, to help their lives, right? It's the same set of skills. Yeah, cool. It's the same set of skills that I developed over the last few years doing video, right? Stepping, and all of that ultimately came from philosophy. All right. So this is my career up to this point so far. All right. So the things I've gotten have come from things I did not commit wholly to. The things that led to all this were random flyers on the wall that I found and said, fuck it, I'll try this, and just happened to obsess about them for some short amount of time. It wasn't something that I committed 10,000 hours to over a decade of my life. These were things I did 2 years tops, 3 years tops, right? But these are the things that opened up all the doors for me, right? So there's a unique thing about this story, right? I think I've been fairly successful. I'm proud of at least the work I've done so far. But according to most people in the industry, I am wholly unqualified to be doing the work I'm doing now, the work that I did before, the work I've done at every step throughout my career. There's something really, and this has been a cloud over my whole career, really. I've always felt a certain sort of imposter syndrome. My resume has no formal training on it, has none. I was fortunate and I found mentors along the way, right? My resume is all over the fucking place. When someone asks, what do you do? I don't even know what to say, right? And it happens so frequently that on my LinkedIn profile, I changed it to the guy from that thing. Because I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, right? But there's something really bizarre about this, right? That the path we're expected to take to get to this point is so very rigid and so very linear, filled with all this formal expectation, when what it takes to actually do this work is everything but, right? Creativity is fundamentally fickle, right? It's fleeting. You cannot force it. You cannot schedule it. You cannot make it happen. That's not how creative works, right? You cannot wake up, get out of bed, go to your office, sit down in front of your computer, and immediately start making the best thing you're capable of making. It simply doesn't work like that, right? Creativity requires a lot of marination. You have to sit and think about the idea. And your first solution, your first take at it, probably going to suck. The second one won't suck as bad, but it'll still suck. The longer you sit in it, it'll get better. It won't suck, it'll be okay. Then maybe it'll be good. Then maybe if you're lucky and you sit there long enough, or if you marinated on it long enough, you'll eventually get to the point where you can make something great. I like to liken it to REM sleep. So for any of those who are unfamiliar, it takes the typical person about 90 minutes of non-REM sleep to finally hit a REM cycle, okay? But if for some reason you're woken up by your neighbor, the person sharing your bed, whatever it is, and you manage to go back to sleep, you don't get to hop right back in that REM sleep. You have to start this process all over again. Okay, creativity functions the exact same way, right? And this is because there is more to creativity than execution. Creativity is not how good you are with the tools. Okay, creativity is not how good of a pixel pusher you are, how much work you produce. That is not what it means to be creative. To be creative is also part conceptualization. Right? The knowledge you have of your tools helps you bring your ideas to life. But conceptualization, using your imagination to come up with new ideas, or instead to combine things from disparate industries and backgrounds together to make something uniquely different, that's conceptualization. That's creativity, right? And we all have our unique brand of creativity. Every one of us, right? Developed over a lifetime of accumulated experiences, skills, interactions with people, work you've seen, art galleries you've been to, movies you've watched. All of us have our unique brand of creativity. My value, your value your unique value is not the same things that make your peers good, right? Your unique value, the thing that makes you uniquely gifted or talented or qualified to do the work you're doing or will one day do, is the stuff that your peers can't do. Is those shared experiences that your peers don't have, right? And this is really important, right? We all have our really unique take on this, our really unique approach. But because of that, we're not all capable of handling the same things. And there's a reason, because creativity is difficult, right? We've come to a point in time in which human knowledge is so advanced, right, that the problems left for us to solve are incredibly complex. They're very difficult. And in order to try and address these problems, we've become, as individuals, increasingly specialized in our knowledge and our skill sets, right? But the problem with that is that now not one of us can solve these major problems, right? And the implication is that creativity has become increasingly a group effort, right? We need each other. I'm not capable of building a Boeing engine, right? Let's do something a little bit closer. I'm not capable of building an entire product on my own, a piece of software. I need so many different people with super specialized skill sets but unique perspectives to work with me to make that thing come to life, right? It's a group effort, which is why communities like Creative Mornings are so important. We can either succeed together or we can fail alone. And that's what ultimately is facing all of us, and that's why this is so crucial, right? Creative Mornings to me was another random tweet that came in, and I said, I never heard of this thing. Yeah, I'll take a look, right? First I was like, fuck this. I'm not doing this, like this. Okay, but over time, I eventually got convinced to do it. I said, listen, I'll try it for a month. If I hate it, I won't do it again. All right? But through Creative Mornings, I not only built my professional community, but I built this personal community as well. And this is why I think we need to hold on to this, why this is so special for everybody in this room. We need each other, okay? Push on each other, pull on each other, fight together. Don't be afraid of dissent, right? Work together to solve these really complex problems, whether they're societal, professional, personal, whatever they are. You don't have the skills to do it on your own, right? But everyone else in this room can help you. And that's what this community has meant to me over the last 4 years, right? So I've talked a lot about commitment. I've gone around and around and around. And in the end, what I want to say is this. What ultimately makes a great individual creative is another individual creative, right? Or many other individual creatives. I owe my career to this. If it wasn't for those 5 guys that I lived with, I would have never gone to this audition and learned to step. If I had never learned to step, I would have never started my career producing television shows at MTV. That opened up the door. But had I not studied philosophy and just said, had I not taken a random Thursday evening class rather than avoiding a Friday morning one, I would have never taken philosophy. Had I never taken philosophy, I would have never developed the skills that allowed me to be successful at MTV, that allowed me to be successful in STEP, that allowed me to be successful at product design, right? You will never meet the person who has the opportunity to change your life sitting in your home watching Netflix. You will or can meet the person who has the opportunity to change your trajectory sitting here in these seats. That should be celebrated. So let's take it back to when I used to host. Everybody raise their hand. Do me a favor and look at the person on your left. They're not looking at you. Look at the person on your right. They're not looking at you either. Look at the person behind you. Ton of people not looking at you. Now look back at me. I'm looking at you. Do me a favor. Let's celebrate. Give everybody around you a nice high five. And that's all I got. Sophia?
Today, he was like a professor. I never heard philosophy broken down like that.
There you go.
4 years ago, Keith brought me on as a volunteer. I stopped him at the person to become a volunteer, but he's still looking on. And it is my absolute happy and amazing opportunity, also slightly unhappy because I have to fill the shoes, to become the host of this amazing, beautiful chapter. So much
Don't.
It's too early to cry. I won't cry.
Do it.
But you guys, I think what Keith said really resonates. Today I sat and I was an attendee, like it was the first couple times that we were recordings, and it felt so good. And I hope that we continue that feeling throughout. So please continue to support us and love us. And we're gonna have Keith come back.
I'll be here for the birthday party.
Yeah, he'll be here for the birthday party.
You can drink with me.
I was gonna switch the slides, but I feel like here we go. This is our manifesto for Creative Mornings. And since Keith has done this every time, I'm gonna let Keith do it one last time for us.
I don't need the mic. All right, everybody. So this is Creative Mornings Global Manifesto. Every chapter worldwide came together and over a period of months tried to characterize into a really brief write-up what Creative Mornings is supposed to be. And if you could skip all of this, I just want everyone to focus on the very last line. Everyone is welcome. We really mean that, right? Creative Mornings is, in our goal, we want it to be the most inclusive, the most welcoming, sometimes inspirational, hopefully educational, but at least fun and warm community you can possibly find. We call ourselves a community. We do not call ourselves a networking event because those blow. We don't call ourselves a conference. Those blow too, right? And they're fucking expensive. This is free to attend. So if there's ever, at any point in time, something that the team can do to make this more approachable for anybody, right? Let us know. If that means new speakers, if that means new locations, if that means better sponsors, or a better host, right? It was time for me to transition out of Creative Mornings. It had gotten stale. I know you guys enjoyed it, but it had not changed over the last year, right? And we had hit these milestones or these plateaus about every 12 months where I felt like it was the same thing as the prior 12 months. And this time I felt like it was the right move for me to go do something else and let someone new come in here and make it different. It's not going to be the same, but it won't be worse, right? So please continue to come. If there's anything the team can do, please let them know. I would love to collaborate with all of you. If you have any ideas, if you want to get goofy and do some fun stuff, if you want to take shots of Jameson and play board games, let's do it, right? Like, you can email me. It's keith@parlay.ai, P-A-R-L-A-Y, keith@parlay.ai. Please get in touch with us. You guys make this thing possible. Thank you so much. I'll take it back over to Sophia.